So, the background is according to Greek myth, Medusa was one of three beautiful sisters known as the Gorgons. The sisters were turned into monsters by Athene, the goddess of wisdom, who was angry at the destruction of one of her temples. Medusa was turned into a horrific creature with a gaping mouth, wow, hypnotic eyes, and hair made of writhing snakes. Anyone who looked into Medusa's eyes was immediately turned to stone. So these are the writer. Aha. So it is Medusa's head, Greek myth retold by Olivia Coolidge. So King Acrisius of Argos was hard, selfish man. He hated his brother, Proetus, who later drove him from his kingdom, and he cared nothing for his daughter, Dana. His whole heart was set on having a son who should succeed him, but since many years went by and still he had only the one daughter, he sent a message to the oracle of Apollo to ask whether he should have more children of his own. The answer of the oracle was terrible. Acrisius should have no son but his daughter, Dana, would bear him a grandchild who should grow up to kill him. At these words, Acrisius was beside himself with fear and rage, swearing that Dana should never have a child to murder him. He had a room built underground and lined all through with brass. Thither he conducted Dana and shut her up, bidding her spend the rest of her life alone. It is possible to thwart the plans of mortal men, but never those of the gods. So Zeus himself looked with pity at the unfortunate girl, and it is said he descended to her through the tiny hole that gave light and air to her chamber. Pouring himself down into her lap in the form of a shower of gold, when word came to the king from those who brought food and drink to his daughter that the girl was with child, Acrisius was angry and afraid. He would have liked best to murder both Dana and her infant son, but he did not dare for fear of the god's anger at so hideous a crime. He made, therefore, a great chest of wood with bands of brass about it, shutting up the girl and her baby inside. Oh, he cast them into the sea, thinking that they would either drown or starve. Again, the gods came to the help of Dana, for they caused the planks of the chest to swell until they fitted tightly and let no water in. The chest floated for some days and was cast up at last on an island. There, Dictys, a fisherman, found it and took Dana to his brother Polydectes, who was king of the island. Dana was made a servant in the palace. Yet, before many years had passed, both Dictys and Polydectes, who was king of the island, Dana was made a servant in the palace. Yet before many years had passed, both Dictys and Polydectes had fallen in love with a silent golden-haired girl. Oh, she in her heart preferred Dictys, yet since his brother was king, she did not dare to make her choice. Therefore she hung always over Perseus, pretending that mother love left her no room for any other. And year after year a silent frown would cross Polydectes' face as he saw her caress the child, as her as he saw her caress the child. At last Perseus became a young man, handsome and strong beyond the common and a leader among the youths of the island. Though he was but the son of a poor servant, though he was though he was but the son of a poor servant. Then it seemed to Polydectes that if he could once get rid of Perseus, he could force Dana to become his wife, whether she would or not. Meanwhile, in order to lull the young man's suspicions, he pretended that he intended to marry a certain noble maiden and would collect a wedding gift for her. Now, the custom was that this gift of the bridegroom to the bride was in part his own and in part put from the marriage presents of his friends and relatives. All the young men, therefore, brought Polydectes a present, excepting Perseus, who was his servant's son and possessed nothing to bring. Then Polydectes said to the others, "This young man owes me more than any of you, since I took him in and brought him up in my own house, and yet he gives me nothing." Perseus answered in anger at the injustice of the charge, "I have nothing of my own, Polydectes. Yet ask me what you will, and I will fetch it, for I owe you my life." At this Polydectes smiled, for it was what he had intended, and he answered, "Fetch me, if this is your boast, the Gorgon's head." Now the Gorgons, who lived far off on the shores of the ocean, were three fearful sisters with hands of brass, wings of gold, and scales like a serpent. Two of them had scaly heads and tusks like the wild boar, but the third, Medusa, had the face of a beautiful woman with hair of writhing serpents. And so terrible was her expression that all who looked on it were immediately turned to stone. This much Perseus knew of the Gorgons, but of how to find or kill them he had no idea. Nevertheless, he had given his promise, and though he saw now the satisfaction of King Polydectes, he was bound to keep his word. In his perplexity, he prayed to the wise goddess, Athene, who came to him in a vision and promised him her aid. "First, you must go," she said, "to the sisters four cities, who will tell you the way to the nymphs who guard the heart of darkness, the winged sandals, and the knapsack which can hold the Gorgon's head. Then I will give you a shield and my brother, Hermes, a sword which shall be made of adamant, the hardest rock. For nothing else can kill the Gorgon, since so venomous is her blood that a mortal sword when plunged in it, is eaten away. But when you come to the Gorgons, invisible in your hat of darkness, turn your eyes away from them and look only on their reflection in your gleaming shield. Thus you may kill the monster without yourself being turned to stone. Pass our sisters by, for they are immortal, but smite off the head of Medusa with a hair of writhing snakes. Then put it in your knapsack and return, and I will be with you." Aha! The vision ended, and with the aid of Athene, Perseus set out on the long journey to seek the four cities. These live in a dim cavern in the far north, where nights and days are one, and where the whole earth is overspread with perpetual twilight. Perpetual twilight. There sat the three old women, mumbling to one another, crouched in a deep heap together, for they had but one eye and one tooth between them, which they passed from hand to hand. Perseus came quietly behind them, and as they fumbled for the eye, he put his strong, brown hand next to one of the long, yellow ones, so that the old crone thought that it was her sister's and put the eye in it. There was a high scream of anger when they discovered the theft, and much clawing and groping in the dim recesses of the cavern. But they were helpless in their blindness, and Perseus' cold laughed at them. At length, for the price of their eye, they told him to reach the nymphs, and Perseus laying the eye quickly in the hand of the nearest sister, fled as fast as he could before she could use it. Again, it was a far journey to the garden of the nymphs, where it is always sunshine and the trees bear golden apples. But the nymphs are friends of the wise gods and hate the monsters of darkness and the spirits of anger and despair. Therefore, they received Perseus with rejoicing and put the heart of darkness on his head, while on his feet they bound the golden winged sandals, which are those Hermes wears when he runs down the slanting sunbeams or races along the pathways of the wind. Next, Perseus put on his back the silver sack with the gleaming tassels of gold and flung across his shoulder the black slid sword that was the gift of Hermes. On his left arm he fitted the shield that Athene gave, a gleaming silver shield like a mirror, plain without any marking. Then he sprang into the air and ran, invisible like the rushing wind, far out over the white capped sea, across the yellow sands of the eastern desert, over strange streams and towering mountains, until at last he came to the shores of the distant ocean which flowed round all the world. There was a great gorge of stone by the ocean's edge, where lay Medusa and her sisters sleeping in the dim depths of the rock. All up and down the stones took fantastic shapes of trees, beasts, birds, or serpents. Here and there a man who had looked on the terrible Medusa stood forever, with horror on his face. Far over the twilit gorge Perseus hovered invisible, which he loosened the pale, strange sword from its black sheath. Then, with his face turned away and eyes on the silver shield, he dropped, slow and silent as a falling leaf, down through the rocky cleft, twisting and turning past countless strange gray shapes, down from the bright sunlight into a chill, dim shadow echoing and re-echoing with the dashing of waves on the tumbled rocks beneath. There, on the heaped stones, lay the Gorgons sleeping together in the dimness, and even as he looked on them in the shield, Perseus felt stiff with horror at the sight. Two of the Gorgons lay sprawled together, shaped like women, yet scaled from head to foot as serpents are. Instead of hands, they had gleaming claws like eagles, and their feet were dragons' feet. Skinny, metallic wings like bats' wings hung from their shoulders. Their faces were neither snake nor woman, but parts both, like faces in a nightmare. These two lay arm in arm and never stirred. Only the blue snake still hissed and writhed round the pale, set face of Medusa, as though even asleep she were troubled by an evil dream. She lay by herself, arms outstretched, face upwards, more beautiful and terrible than living man many bear. All the crimes and madnesses of the world rushed into Perseus' mind as he gazed at her image in the shield. Horror stiffened his arm as he hovered over her with his sword uplifted. Then he shut his eyes to the vision, and in the darkness struck. Oh, so there was a great cry and a hissing. Perseus groped for the head and seized it by the limp and snaky hair. Somehow he put it in his knapsack and was up and off. For at the dreadful scream the sister Gorgons had awakened. Now they were after him, their sharp claws grating against his silver shield. Perseus strained forward on the pathway of the wind like a runner, and behind him the two sisters came, smelling of the prey they could not see. Snakes darted from their girdles. Foam flew from their tusks, and the great wings beat the air. Yet the winged sandals were even swifter than they, and Perseus fled like the hunted deer with the speed of desperation. Presently the horrible noise grew faint behind him. The hissing of snakes and the sound of the bat wings died away. At last the Gorgons could smell him no longer and return home unavenged. By now Perseus was over the Libyan desert, and as the blood from the horrible head touched the sand, it changed to serpents, from which the snakes of Africa are descended. The storms of the Libyan desert blew against Perseus in clouds of a dying sand, and until not even the divine sandals could hold him on his course. Far out to sea he was blown, and then north, finally rolled around the heavens like a cloud of mist. He alighted in the distant west where the giant, Atlas, held up on his shoulders half the heavens from the earth. There the weary giant, crushed under the load of centuries, begged Perseus to show him Medusa's head. Perseus uncovered for him the dreadful thing, and Atlas was changed to the mighty mountain whose rocks rear up to reach the sky near the gateway to the Atlantic. Perseus himself, returning eastwards and still battling with the wind, was driven south to the land of Ethiopia, where King Scipius reigned with his wife Cassiopeia. As Perseus came wheeling in like a gull from the ocean, he saw a strange sight. Far out to sea the water was troubled, seething and boiling as though stirred by a great force moving in its depths. Huge sullen waves were starting far out and washing inland over sunken trees and flooded houses. Many miles of land were under water, and as he sped over them, he saw the muddy sea lapping around the foot of a black, upstanding rock. Here, on a ledge above the water's edge, stood a young girl chained by the arms, lips parted, eyes open and staring, face white as her linen garment. She might have been a statue, so still she stood, while the light breeze fluttered her dress and stirred her loosened hair. As Perseus looked at her and looked at the sea, the water began to boil again, and miles out a long, gray scaly back of vast land lifted itself above the flood. At that there was a shriek from a distant knoll, where he could dimly see the forms of people. But the girl shrank a little and said nothing. Then Perseus, taking off the hat of darkness, alighted near the maiden to talk to her, and she, though nearly mad with terror, found words at last to tell him her tale. Her name was Andromeda, and she was the only child of the king and of his wife, Cassiopeia. Queen Cassiopeia was exceedingly beautiful, so that all people marveled at her. She herself was proud of her dark eyes, her white slender fingers, and her long black hair. So proud that she had been heard to boast that she was fairer even than the sea nymphs who are daughters of Nereus. At this Nereus in wrath stirred of Poseidon, who came flooding in over the land, covering it far and wide. Not content with this, Not content with this, he sent a vast monster from the dark depths of the bottomless sea to ravage the whole coast of Ethiopia. When the unfortunate king and queen had sought the advice of the oracle on how to appease the god, they had been ordered to sacrifice their only daughter to the sea monster Poseidon had sent. Not daring for their people's sake to disobey, they had chained her to this rock, when she now awaited the beast who should devour her. Perseus comforted Andromeda as he stood by her on the rock, and she shrunk closer against him while the great gray back writhed its half-mile length slowly towards the land. Then, bidding Andromeda hide her face, Perseus sprang once more into the air, unveiling the dreadful head of dead Medusa to the monsters, which reared its dripping jaws yards high into the air. The mighty tail stiffened all of a sudden. The boiling of the water ceased, and only the gentle waves of the receding ocean lapped around a long gray ridge of stone. Then Perseus freed Andromeda, and restored her to her father and beautiful mother. Thereafter, with their consent, he married her amid scenes of tremendous rejoicing, and with his bride set sail at last for the kingdom of Polydectes. Polydectes had lost no time on the departure of Perseus. First he had begged Dana to become his wife, and then he had threatened her. Undoubtedly he would have got his way by force, if Dana had not fled in terror to Dictys. The two took refuge at the altar of a temple, whence Polydectes did not dare drag them away. So matters stood when Perseus returned. Polydectes was enraged to see him, for he had hoped at least that Dana's most powerful protector would never return. But now, seeing him famous and with a king's daughter to wife, he could not contain himself. Openly he laughed at the tale of Perseus, saying that the hero had never killed the Gorgon, only pretended to, and that now he was claiming an honor he did not deserve. At this Perseus, enraged by the insult and by reports of his mother's persecution, said to him, "You asked me for the Gorgon's head. Behold it." And with that he lifted it high, and Polydectes became stone. Oh. Then Perseus left Dictys to be king of that island, but he himself went back to the Grecian mainland to seek out his grandfather Acrisius, who was once again king of Argos. First, however, he gave back to the gods the gifts they had given him. Hermes took back the golden sandals and the hat of darkness, for both are his. But Athene took Medusa's head, and she hung it on a fleece around her neck as part of her battle equipment, where it may be seen in statues and portraits of the warlike goddess. Perseus took ship Perseus took ship for Greece, but his fame had gone before him, and King Acrisius fled secretly from Argos in terror, since he remembered the prophecy and feared that Perseus had come to avenge the wrongs of Dana. The trembling old Acrisius took refuge in Larissa, where it happened the king was holding a great athletic contest in honor of his dead father. Heroes from all over Greece, among whom was Perseus, came to the games. As Perseus was competing at the discus throwing, he threw high into the air and far beyond the rest. A strong wind caught the discus as it spun, so that it left a course mark out for it and was carried into the stands. People scrambled away to right and left. Wow! Only Acrisius was not nimble enough. The heavy weight fell full on his foot and crushed his toes. And at that, the feeble old man, already weakened by his terrors, died from the shock. Thus, the prophecy of Apollo was fulfilled at last. Acrisius was killed by his grandson. Then Perseus came into his kingdom, where he reigned with Andromeda long and happily. I see. So I'm done. All right. A copy of Medusa's head reading questions.